She walked into the airport with confidence, passport in hand, ticket to first class, and a schedule that could move markets. But before she could even reach the gate, a single laugh changed everything. It wasn't loud, but it cut deep, a sound laced with mockery, the kind that says you don't belong here. In seconds, the air turned heavy, and what should have been a routine check-in became a quiet act of humiliation witnessed by dozens and ignored by all. What no one knew was that this woman wasn't just another passenger. She was power disguised as grace, and the storm she would unleash would shake an entire industry. She thought it was just another flight, but the real journey was about to begin. Naomi Sinclair lived her life at 30,000 feet, meetings in London, summits in Dubai, charity galas in New York. Her days blurred into a rhythm of success few could match. As the founder of one of the world's most exclusive travel networks, she'd built an empire that connected cultures and redefined luxury. Yet beneath her poise was something deeper, a quiet strength born from years of being underestimated, dismissed, and forced to prove she belonged in rooms not designed for her. That morning, she arrived at the airport like she always did. Early, composed, a vision of calm amid chaos. The scent of roasted coffee drifted through the terminal. The overhead speakers hummed with the language of departures. She smiled politely at staff, her passport stamped with proof of every barrier she'd already broken. But as she approached the gate, she couldn't ignore it. The shift in the air, the lingering stares, the slight hesitation in the agent's smile. It was subtle, almost invisible to others, but to her it was familiar. Naomi had learned to recognize that silence before the storm, the one that always came before someone decided what kind of woman she was allowed to be. She thought this flight would be just another trip, but what waited at the counter would test not just her patience, but the quiet power she spent a lifetime building. And before the plane ever left the ground, everything she stood for was about to be challenged. Naomi approached the counter with her usual quiet confidence, the kind earned through years of breaking ceilings that weren't meant to bend. Her flight to Zurich was a gateway to another boardroom, another deal worth millions, another step in expanding her global travel group, a company that had become the gold standard in luxury tourism. But the moment she spoke, everything changed. The gate agent, Chloe Patterson, looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze flicked from Naomi's face to her passport, then back again, lingering just long enough to draw a line that words didn't have to. "That's quite the accent you've got," she said, her tone feather-light but sharp underneath. A chuckle slipped out, quiet but cruel, echoing just loud enough for nearby staff to hear. The shift was instant. Conversations paused. The hum of the terminal seemed to dim, as if the air itself was waiting to see what Naomi would do. Then came the mistake. Her first-class seat vanished. "There's been a change in your booking," Chloe announced, tapping at her keyboard with practiced attachment. "You've been reassigned to economy. It happens sometimes." But Naomi knew better. She saw the smirk behind the words, the unspoken decision already made. Passengers behind her exchanged glances, some curious, some annoyed at the delay, others pretending not to notice. The kind of silence that said, "Don't get involved." Naomi's jaw tightened. She had faced prejudice before in boardrooms and negotiations, but there was something especially cutting about this. The audacity of being humiliated in public by someone who believed she could get away with it. When she asked for a supervisor, Chloe's expression hardened. Minutes stretched into an orchestrated eternity as Chloe made half-hearted calls that went nowhere. Each passing second was deliberate, a reminder that even power could be made to wait when it wore the wrong face. Naomi stood still, her posture unyielding, her silence sharper than accusation. The crowd shifted around her, an audience complicit in its discomfort. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A young flight attendant, Grace, hesitated by the counter, her gaze flickering with something like guilt before darting away. Another staff member, Lucas, leaned close to Chloe, whispering, "Maybe we should fix this." But his voice was swallowed by the tension. Naomi caught the words brand image on his lips, and the truth crystallized. It wasn't a glitch. It was a choice. Her seat had been reassigned not because of an error, but because she didn't fit the picture the airline wanted to show in first class. A tremor of anger ran through her, but she didn't let it break the surface. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A single message from her assistant. Ready. She didn't smile, but her heart steadied. They thought they were stripping her dignity. Instead, they were building their own downfall one smug word at a time. Around her, the terminal carried on in its indifferent rhythm. Boarding calls, luggage wheels, the sterile hum of travel. But under that calm, Naomi could feel something gathering, a quiet current ready to turn into a flood. Grace passed by again, her steps uncertain, her conscience visibly at war. Lucas avoided eye contact now, his face pale with regret. Only Chloe seemed unshaken, her authority propped up by ignorance, her laughter brittle and rehearsed. Naomi noted every detail. The timestamp of the reassignment, the staff names, the witnesses frozen in silence. She wasn't just enduring this moment. She was documenting it. And when her name was finally called for boarding, long after everyone else had gone, she walked down that jet bridge not as a defeated woman, but as someone who understood the cost of silence and the power of patience. Because what awaited this airline wasn't outrage or a social media storm. It was something far more devastating. A quiet exodus, a financial reckoning that would expose every bias hidden behind customer service smiles. They had no idea that the woman they mocked could destroy them without ever raising her voice. But they were about to find out. If Chloe had known who Naomi really was, she might have chosen her words more carefully, but by the time she realized her mistake, it would already be too late. By the time Naomi's plane touched down in Denver, the storm she'd set in motion was already circling the globe. In the hours since that humiliating moment at the gate, emails had been sent, partnerships had been suspended, and the name of the airline had begun quietly disappearing from contracts worth hundreds of millions. Inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking the skyline, Naomi sat surrounded by her senior executives, lawyers, PR advisors, and global partners, all waiting for her signal. The evidence was irrefutable. Timestamps, recorded exchanges, witness statements, and screenshots from employees who had already started leaking internal memos. What had begun as a single act of arrogance was now an unfolding corporate catastrophe. Meanwhile, in the terminal hundreds of miles away, Chloe Patterson's world was unraveling. Calls poured in from supervisors demanding explanations she didn't have. Security footage was being pulled for review. Lucas had finally spoken up, trembling as he recounted exactly what he'd heard, that the decision to downgrade Naomi had come from an unspoken brand image directive. Grace, the young flight attendant, broke her silence next, submitting a statement that confirmed it all. The truth had taken flight faster than any plane could travel. Naomi watched the fallout unfold in real time. Headlines brewing, investors withdrawing, social media igniting not an outrage, but an eerie silence as major travel groups severed ties. Within 24 hours, her company, Sinclair Global Voyages, announced the termination of all $950 million in joint contracts with the airline, citing irreconcilable ethical failures. Stocks plummeted. Executives scrambled for damage control, their rehearsed apologies too late to stop the bleeding. But Naomi didn't celebrate. She wasn't driven by revenge. She was fueled by something deeper, a need for accountability in a world where dignity was still seen as negotiable. For Chloe, the realization came slow, like an echo she couldn't silence. Her laughter at the gate replayed in her head until it became unbearable. She was escorted into a sterile meeting room, corporate HR words blurring into static, termination, policy breach, conduct review. She had thought it was just another day at work. She had thought Naomi was just another traveler. But as the magnitude of her mistake unfolded, she understood the full weight of her actions. Not just a seat reassignment, but the legacy of every moment that taught her to believe some voices mattered less than others. Back in her office, Naomi stood by the window, watching planes rise into the dawn. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Airline faces industry-wide backlash after executive passenger humiliated at LAX. She exhaled slowly, the tension she carried for years finally uncoiling. But beneath the calm, there was sorrow too, a quiet grief for how predictable this story had been. She had simply become the mirror that forced the system to see itself. Across the industry, executives whispered her name with a mix of fear and respect, calling it the Sinclair effect. Yet for Naomi, it wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. Her silence at that counter had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. The same silence that once erased her had now become her weapon. Still, as she looked out across the morning horizon, she wondered how many others were still being silenced in airports, offices, and streets across the world, their dignity dismissed with a smile and a shrug. What happened next wouldn't just change an airline. It would challenge an entire culture that thrived on quiet prejudice. And Naomi Sinclair was far from finished. In the weeks that followed, the ripples of Naomi Sinclair's silent stand became waves that reshaped an entire industry. The airline's polished image, once built on luxury and inclusivity, crumbled under public scrutiny. Statements were issued, apologies drafted, and diversity campaigns hastily launched. But none could erase the fact that one woman's dignity had been treated as expendable, and that she had answered not with outrage, but with power. Naomi never returned to the spotlight. She declined interviews, ignored offers for documentaries, and instead focused on building new initiatives, funding scholarships for young Black women entering the travel and aviation sectors, creating safe pathways into spaces that had once excluded her. Her message was simple. Silence can destroy, but it can also rebuild when wielded with intention. For Chloe Patterson, the woman behind the counter, the fallout was personal and irreversible. She lost her job, yes, but what haunted her most wasn't unemployment. It was reflection. The viral coverage forced her to see herself not as the villain of a viral headline, but as a symptom of a larger sickness. The quiet, everyday bias so normalized that she hadn't even recognized it as cruelty until it was too late. Grace, the flight attendant, reached out months later, asking to meet Naomi. Their conversation, brief but honest, marked something rare in these stories, a moment of accountability met with compassion. Naomi didn't forgive her to absolve the past. She did it to free the future, because that was the heart of this story, that injustice thrives in silence, and real change begins the moment someone dares to disrupt that silence. The world watched a powerful woman dismantle a system that once belittled her, but what mattered most was not the collapse of a corporation. It was a rise of awareness, the understanding that even the smallest act of prejudice can cost far more than its perpetrators ever imagined. Naomi's name became more than a headline. It became a reminder that respect should never be conditional, and dignity should never depend on who's watching. In airports, in offices, in quiet corners of society where bias still hides behind professionalism, her story lingered like a warning and a hope, a call for everyone to look closer, speak louder, and demand better. Because if a single laugh could trigger an empire's fall, imagine what a world of empathy could build in its place. The question now is not whether Naomi's story will be remembered, but whether it will be repeated,